The flight was full. The passengers were settled. But in just minutes, one family's dream trip turned into a nightmare. A flight attendant stood over them, her voice sharp. "You need to move, now." Confused, the father held up their tickets. "We paid for these seats." The attendant didn't care. She forced them to the back of the plane. What she didn't know? Someone powerful was watching, and just 7 minutes later, in front of the entire cabin, she was about to get the shock of her life. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss a new one. They were just a family, excited for their trip, settling into their seats ready for takeoff. The mother, Elena Carter, adjusted her daughter's seatbelt, her hands moving with the ease of someone used to traveling. Her husband, Darius Carter, reached for the in-flight magazine, flipping through it without much interest. Across the aisle, their son, Tobias Carter, leaned against the window, watching the ground crew load luggage onto the plane. It was a moment of quiet anticipation, the kind that always came before a journey. But that peace didn't last long. A shadow fell over them. When Elena looked up, a flight attendant was standing there, arms crossed tightly over her crisp uniform. Olivia Blake, as her name tag read, had a stiff posture and an expression that immediately set Elena on edge. Something about the way she stood, the way she looked down at them, didn't sit right. She wasn't smiling like the other attendants had when greeting passengers. Instead, she stared at them as if they were sitting in the wrong place. "Can I see your tickets?" Olivia's voice was clipped, almost impatient. Elena blinked, surprised by the request. They had already gone through boarding, had already been checked. Still, she reached into her bag, pulling out the printed tickets. She handed them over with a polite smile. "Of course." Olivia took the tickets, scanning them longer than necessary. The muscles in her jaw tightened slightly, and then she sighed. "These seats are in premium economy," she said. "This section is reserved for premium passengers." A pause. Elena exchanged a glance with Darius, confusion flashing between them. "Yes," Elena said slowly. "That's what we booked. Premium economy." "You'll have to move to the back," Olivia said, handing the tickets back without so much as another glance. Tobias frowned, his small hands gripping the armrest. He might have only been 10, but even he could tell something wasn't right. "Why do we have to move?" he asked. Elena's stomach twisted. She kept her tone calm, measured. "Is there a problem with our tickets?" Olivia's lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't know how you got these," she said, her voice lowering slightly, "but these seats are for premium customers." Darius sat up straighter, his eyes darkening. "We are premium customers," he said, keeping his voice firm but controlled. "We paid for these seats. There must be some mistake." The flight attendant's expression didn't change. If anything, the tension in her shoulders grew. "I need you to move, now." A murmur passed through the rows nearby. A few passengers glanced over, some pretending not to listen, others openly staring. No one spoke up. No one questioned why this family, who had done nothing wrong, was suddenly being asked to leave their seats. Elena took a deep breath. She had no interest in causing a scene, but she wasn't going to be bullied either. "Can you check with the gate agent?" she asked, trying to keep the conversation civil. "They confirmed our seats when we boarded." Olivia's patience snapped. "I don't have time for this. Either move or I'll have to call security." The words cut through the air like a slap. Darius clenched his jaw, his fingers curling into fists on his lap. Elena felt her heart pound, anger mixing with something deeper, something colder, humiliation. She reached for her bag, her hands trembling slightly as she gathered their things. Tobias swallowed hard, looking from his parents to the flight attendant. He opened his mouth to say something, but stopped when Elena gave him a small shake of her head. "Not here. Not now." They stood, stepping out into the aisle, and as they did, the weight of every watching eye pressed down on them. Some passengers looked away, pretending not to see what was happening. Others just stared, curiosity flickering in their expressions, but no concern. Not one person spoke up. Elena led her children toward the back of the plane, her head held high, but inside something burned. Darius followed closely behind, his movements stiff with controlled frustration. Tobias clutched his backpack strap tightly, his small face twisted in confusion. None of it made sense, But as they made their way to the rear of the plane, a man in first class lowered his phone, his sharp eyes following the scene. Robert Hayes, an executive dressed in a sleek navy suit, tapped his screen and dialed a number. The moment the line connected, his voice was calm but precise. "We have a situation on Flight 476. Handle it immediately." Elena gripped her daughter's hand tightly as they moved toward the back of the plane, her face calm, but inside anger churned. She had experienced subtle forms of discrimination before, the kind that made people question whether it was real or just in their head. But this was blatant. Darius walked beside her, his shoulders stiff, jaw clenched. He wasn't a man who lost his temper easily, but she could feel the tension radiating off him. Tobias glanced back at Olivia, watching as the flight attendant smoothed her uniform and moved on as if nothing had happened. She didn't seem to care that she had just humiliated them in front of a full cabin. Instead, she continued greeting other passengers who, unlike them, weren't being asked to move. Tobias might have been young, but he wasn't blind. He understood. At the back of the plane, Elena searched for empty seats. The only available ones were in a cramped row near the restrooms. She let out a slow breath, keeping her voice steady for the children's sake. "Let's sit here," she said, helping Mia into her seat. Darius remained standing, his hands on his hips. "This isn't right," he muttered. Elena nodded slightly. "I know." A few rows ahead, a younger flight attendant, Emma Davis, had been watching the entire exchange. Unlike Olivia, she wasn't as experienced, and she didn't carry the same rigid authority. Her eyes flickered toward the family, then back to Olivia, uncertainty written all over her face. She hesitated before speaking. "Did they have the wrong seats?" Olivia barely looked at her. "I handled it," she said dismissively. "They didn't belong up there." Emma frowned. Something about the way Olivia said that didn't sit right with her. The family had looked confused, not guilty. And the father, he had been calm, asking questions, not causing trouble. They had the right seats. She was sure of it. Meanwhile, in first class, Robert Hayes set his phone down, watching as the Carters took their seats in the back. His expression remained unreadable, but his fingers drummed against the armrest. He was a man who had spent years in the airline industry, and he had seen situations like this before, but rarely did they unfold so openly. A few seconds later, his phone vibrated. He picked it up, reading the message on the screen. "Handling it now. Expect an update soon." Robert exhaled through his nose, his grip tightening on his phone. This was going to be dealt with, and quickly. But Olivia Blake had no idea what was coming. The hum of the plane's engines filled the cabin, but for Elena, the noise barely registered. She sat stiffly in the cramped seat, her hands resting on her lap, her fingers curled into her palms. Mia leaned against her, oblivious to the tension, her little hands gripping her stuffed toy. Tobias, however, was different. His wide eyes darted around, absorbing everything. He didn't understand why they had to move, but he understood that something was wrong. Darius sat beside them, his arms crossed tightly, his foot tapping against the floor. He wasn't the kind of man who made a scene, but this had gone too far. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. "I'm texting my brother," he muttered under his breath. "He needs to hear about this." Elena placed a hand on his arm, her voice low. "Let's wait until we land." Darius exhaled sharply, but he nodded. There was no point in escalating things now, not while they were trapped on this plane. Meanwhile, up front, Olivia walked through the first-class cabin with the same air of authority she always carried. She poured coffee, exchanged polite smiles, and pretended as if she hadn't just humiliated an entire family in front of a plane full of passengers. But what she didn't notice was the way Robert Hayes watched her. Sitting comfortably in seat 1A, Robert remained quiet, his sharp eyes following Olivia's every move. He wasn't an executive who enjoyed confrontation, but he believed in accountability. And right now, Olivia was about to face it in a way she had never expected. The in-flight phone at the front of the plane buzzed. Olivia barely glanced at it before answering. "This is Olivia." The voice on the other end was calm, steady, and carried the weight of authority. "Ms. Blake, report to the cockpit immediately." She stiffened slightly. The only time a flight attendant was called to the cockpit mid-flight was if there was an issue that required immediate attention. Her mind raced. Had she missed something? She straightened her uniform, glanced around to make sure everything was in order, then turned on her heel and made her way toward the front. Passengers continued their conversations, oblivious to what was happening. But Emma Davis, still lingering near the service station, watched as Olivia disappeared behind the cockpit door. Something wasn't right, and Olivia was about to find out exactly what it was. Olivia stepped into the cockpit, expecting a routine update from the captain. Maybe turbulence ahead, maybe a small issue with service timing. Nothing she couldn't handle. But the moment she closed the door behind her, she realized this was different. Captain Gregory Holt sat in his seat, his face unreadable, hands resting calmly on the control panel. Beside him, First Officer Daniel Price kept his gaze forward, focused on the flight instruments. But the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. The real shock, however, came from the small screen on the control panel, where a live video call was in progress. The image on the screen showed a man in a dark suit, eyes sharp, expression cold. Ethan Caldwell, the airline's vice president of operations. Olivia's stomach twisted. This wasn't just a routine issue. "Ms. Blake," Ethan's voice came through the speaker, his tone smooth but firm. "We need to discuss what just happened in your cabin." Olivia's pulse quickened. She folded her hands in front of her, keeping her posture professional. "Of course, what's the issue?" Ethan didn't blink. "A family was removed from premium economy under your orders. Explain why." Olivia opened her mouth, prepared to respond, but something in the captain's expression stopped her. She had expected support from her crew, but there was none. Captain Holt didn't offer his usual nod of agreement. First Officer Price didn't so much as glance in her direction. She was alone in this. She cleared her throat. "There was a mistake with the seating. Their tickets must have been issued incorrectly." Ethan's face remained unreadable. "Did you verify that before asking them to move?" A pause. Olivia hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I reviewed their tickets and something didn't look right. I made a judgment call." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "A judgment call?" Olivia swallowed. "Yes. I've handled situations like this before. People sometimes get upgrades they aren't supposed to, or they take seats they didn't pay for." Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. "So, you assumed that's what happened?" Her throat went dry. Captain Holt exhaled slowly, shifting in his seat. "Ms. Blake, I pulled up the passenger manifest after I heard about this incident." He turned to her, his voice measured. "Their tickets were valid. Their upgrade was paid for. You removed a family that had every right to sit in their assigned seats." A cold wave washed over Olivia. Ethan's voice cut through the silence. "And you did it in front of a full cabin of passengers without verifying the information first." For the first time, Olivia felt something crack inside her confidence. She had spent years controlling situations like this, making quick decisions, maintaining order in her cabin. But now, standing in the cockpit with 3 men staring her down, one of whom had the power to end her career with a single word, she felt something she wasn't used to. She felt powerless. Ethan's voice dropped slightly, carrying an edge that made her spine stiffen. "You need to understand the severity of what you've done, Ms. Blake, because we do." Olivia forced herself to breathe, but deep down she knew. This wasn't just a warning. This was the beginning of something much worse. Olivia's hands felt clammy, but she kept them clasped tightly in front of her, determined not to let them see her nerves. This wasn't the first time she had made a tough call. She had been with the airline for over a decade. She knew how to handle difficult passengers, how to enforce the rules. But something about the way Ethan Caldwell was staring at her, his eyes cold and calculating, told her this situation was different. She forced her voice to stay even. "I was following standard procedure. If I made an error, I'll correct it when we land." Ethan didn't react. He simply picked up a folder from his desk, flipping it open. "Ms. Blake, do you know who was sitting in seat 1A? Olivia blinked. That wasn't what she expected. I'm not sure." Ethan tapped the folder. "Robert Hayes." Her stomach dropped. Robert Hayes, the airline's regional director. The man who had been watching everything from first class. Ethan let the silence settle before he continued. Mr. Hayes witnessed everything. From the moment you questioned the Carter's tickets to the moment you forced them to move. He saw the way you spoke to them. He saw that you didn't question anyone else in premium economy, just them. Olivia's throat tightened. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice controlled but sharp. Mr. Hayes made one phone call. That's why you're here right now. Captain Holt shifted in his seat. Olivia, he said, his tone softer than Ethan's, but still firm. Why did you assume they didn't belong? She felt the heat rush to her face. I didn't assume anything. Ethan cut her off. Yes, you did. Olivia's breath caught. You didn't check the manifest before making them move. You didn't verify their tickets with the gate agent. You didn't quietly resolve a potential issue. You humiliated a paying family in front of an entire cabin full of passengers. Her chest felt tight. Ethan's voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now, like a blade being sharpened. And now, because of your actions, we have a PR crisis brewing mid-flight. Because those passengers, they aren't just sitting in the back of the plane right now. They're texting, tweeting, messaging people on the ground. Olivia's heart pounded. Ethan exhaled slowly. And when we land, this airline is going to be the top story. The weight of those words crushed the last bit of confidence she had left. She had always believed she was untouchable, but now standing in the cockpit, with the captain refusing to meet her eyes and the vice president of operations laying out the consequences before they had even landed. For the first time in her career, Olivia Blake felt fear. Olivia's mouth felt dry, but she forced herself to stand straight. She had dealt with complaints before. Some passengers always found a reason to be unhappy. But this wasn't just a complaint. This was something bigger, something she couldn't control. She swallowed, choosing her words carefully. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I was doing what I thought was best for the integrity of the cabin. Ethan's jaw tightened, but it was Captain Holt who spoke first. Integrity? His voice was calm, but there was something dangerous in the way he said the word. Tell me, Olivia, what exactly made you believe that family didn't belong in premium economy? Olivia felt a cold sweat creep up her back. I didn't say they didn't belong. You didn't have to, Ethan cut in smoothly. Your actions said it for you. She opened her mouth to argue, but Ethan continued before she could. Do you realize how many complaints we've already received? Passengers on this flight have already contacted customer service. He tapped his phone, pulling up a screen. The airline's social media team just forwarded me a tweet from seat 14B. Saw a black family get removed from premium economy on my flight for no reason. Flight attendant didn't even check their tickets properly. Unbelievable. Olivia's stomach twisted. Ethan scrolled. Another one. From 22F, watching a flight attendant kick a family out of their seats because she didn't think they belonged is one of the most disgusting things I've seen. Shame on this airline. He set his phone down, his expression unreadable. Do you understand the position you put us in? Olivia clenched her hands. This is being blown out of proportion. Captain Holt let out a slow breath, rubbing his temple. No, Olivia, this is exactly what it looks like. The air in the cockpit felt suffocating. Ethan folded his hands together. Let me be absolutely clear with you, Ms. Blake. You have been a senior flight attendant for over 10 years. You should know better than to make decisions based on assumptions. Olivia's face burned. I wasn't basing anything on assumptions. Ethan's voice sharpened. Then tell me why you didn't check the manifest before removing them? Silence. The seconds stretched painfully. Ethan leaned back, his eyes never leaving her. I'll tell you why. Because you assumed they didn't belong there. You assumed they had done something wrong. And instead of following proper protocol, you embarrassed them in front of an entire cabin of people. His words cut through her like a blade. And now, because of your actions, we are going to be dealing with a PR nightmare before we even land. Olivia's breath came faster. Ethan turned to Captain Holt. Here's what's going to happen. Effective immediately, Olivia Blake is relieved of her duties for the remainder of this flight. Olivia's head snapped up. What? You will not be working this cabin anymore, Ethan continued, voice steady and cold. You will return to the crew area, remain there until we land, and you will not speak to any passengers. Olivia's mind reeled. You can't do this. I just did, Ethan interrupted. And when we land, there will be an official review of your employment. Her chest tightened. Ethan's next words were slow, final. Your career with this airline may very well be over. The cockpit went silent. Captain Holt exhaled, but he didn't argue. He didn't defend her. Because he knew, just like Olivia knew. She had done this to herself. The weight of it all crashed onto her, pressing into her chest, making it hard to breathe. She had spent years running this cabin, making sure things operated smoothly. She had been the one in control, the one making the rules, the one deciding who was welcome and who wasn't. And now, she was the one being removed. Her legs felt weak as she turned, forcing herself to step out of the cockpit. The moment she re-entered the first-class cabin, she could feel the shift. Passengers who had once barely acknowledged her presence were now watching. Some whispered, some pretended not to look. But others, they stared at her with something different. Judgment. For the first time in her career, Olivia Blake felt the stares she had once ignored. And this time, she couldn't turn away. Olivia stepped into the first-class cabin, her stomach twisting as she felt the weight of every gaze on her. The passengers weren't just glancing at her anymore. They were watching. Conversations had slowed, eyes lifted from screens, and heads turned slightly as she walked past. No one said anything outright, but she could feel it. The same passengers who had smiled at her earlier now regarded her with something else entirely. Disapproval. It wasn't loud, it wasn't direct, but it was there. She squared her shoulders, trying to maintain what little dignity she had left, but it was impossible to ignore the shift. The quiet hum of the plane was suddenly deafening. She moved toward the galley at the back of first class, her hands clenched at her sides. She needed to compose herself, but before she could reach the galley, a voice stopped her cold. Excuse me. Olivia froze. The voice belonged to Robert Hayes. She turned slowly, her face carefully neutral. The man in seat 1A was looking at her, his fingers lightly tapping against the armrest. He had barely spoken the entire flight. Now his sharp, assessing gaze locked onto her with a level of scrutiny that made her pulse spike. She opened her mouth, forcing her voice to remain professional. Yes, sir? Is there something I can get you? Robert studied her for a long moment. The silence stretched, making her shift slightly under the weight of it. Then his lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. I was just wondering, he said casually, his voice calm but edged with something unmistakable. What exactly made you decide that the Carter family didn't belong in premium economy? Olivia's breath hitched. A few passengers turned their heads slightly, pretending to stay focused on their movies or books, but clearly listening. The tension in the air thickened. Olivia forced a tight smile. There was a seating issue. I was just trying to make sure everything was correct. Robert nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Ah, and did you verify that before making them move? She stiffened. I was following standard procedure. Robert exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slightly. No, you weren't. His voice was low but firm. Because if you had followed procedure, we wouldn't be having this conversation, would we? Olivia's face burned. For the first time in a very, very long time, she felt small. Robert leaned back in his seat, still watching her. Do you know what the worst part is? She didn't answer. The worst part isn't just that you embarrassed them in front of the entire cabin, Robert continued, his voice calm but cutting. It's that when it was happening, not one person stood up for them. Silence. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably, their gazes dropping to their laps. Olivia's throat tightened. She could feel the shift around her. Passengers weren't just watching anymore. They were thinking. Robert let his words hang in the air before he finally sighed, adjusting the cuff of his suit jacket. But don't worry, you're going to get a very personal experience of what that feels like. Her mouth felt dry. Sir, But before she could finish, the in-flight intercom crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Olivia's stomach dropped. The cabin quieted, passengers pausing their conversations. We'd like to apologize for an incident that occurred earlier in this flight. Captain Holt's voice carried through the speakers, calm but authoritative. A seating mistake was made, and as a result, a family was wrongly removed from their assigned seats in premium economy. A murmur spread through the cabin. Olivia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "The airline deeply regrets this mistake," the captain continued, "and I'd like to personally thank Mr. Robert Hayes for bringing this to our attention so we can make sure it is properly addressed." Robert didn't react. He simply sat there, still watching Olivia, with that same unreadable expression. Her face burned with humiliation. This was worse than anything she had expected. She had thought maybe a private warning, a quiet conversation after landing. But this, a public announcement, acknowledging the mistake to the entire plane, she felt exposed in a way she never had before, and she wasn't the only one. Several passengers who had sat silently earlier, when the Carters were being forced to move, now exchanged glances. Some looked uncomfortable, others looked ashamed. They had all witnessed it. They had all watched it happen, and not one of them had spoken up. Now, with the captain openly addressing the situation, it was impossible to ignore. Tobias, who had been quiet in his seat in the back of the plane, lifted his head. "Mama," he whispered, "are they talking about us?" Elena squeezed his hand gently. She didn't say anything, but the small, knowing smile that tugged at her lips spoke volumes. Yes. Yes, they were. And for the first time since they had been forced out of their seats, the tide was shifting. But for Olivia Blake, the nightmare was just beginning. Olivia stood frozen in the aisle, her breathing shallow as the captain's words echoed through the cabin. A mistake was made. A family was wrongly removed. We deeply regret this mistake. Every syllable landed like a hammer, pounding against the wall she had built around herself. Passengers weren't just watching her anymore. They were witnessing her downfall in real time. The murmurs grew louder, spreading like ripples in water. She caught bits and pieces of hushed conversations. "Wait, was that about the family from earlier? I thought something seemed off. That was them, wasn't it? She made the move for no reason?" Someone in row 6 let out a low whistle. Damn, they really called her out like that. Heat crawled up Olivia's neck, her uniform suddenly feeling too tight. She had never been put on blast like this. Not in front of everyone. Not by a captain. Not in a way that made it clear. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was her fault. She wanted to turn, to disappear into the galley, but before she could move, Robert Hayes spoke again. "Well," he said smoothly, his voice carrying over the whispers, "I guess that answers my question." Olivia's hands clenched at her sides. Robert leaned back, casual, controlled, like a man who knew he had already won. "You ever notice how people in power don't like being held accountable until it's too late?" A few passengers chuckled, low, knowing laughter that cut Olivia deeper than any raised voice could have. She swallowed hard, struggling to keep her expression neutral, but the damage was done. Then from the back of the plane, a voice rang out, clear, strong, and impossible to ignore. "That apology should be given to us, not the passengers." Every head turned toward Darius Carter. He was still seated in economy, his posture straight, his hands resting calmly on his lap. But his eyes were locked onto Olivia. And he wasn't smiling. Tobias and Mia looked up at their father, wide-eyed, sensing the shift in the air. Elena placed a hand on Darius's arm, but she didn't stop him. She agreed with him. The murmurs vanished. The tension in the plane had changed. Because he was right. The captain had apologized to the passengers. The airline had tried to cover their bases. But Olivia, the person who had actually done it, hadn't said a word. A few seats over, Emma Davis, the younger flight attendant who had watched everything unfold, felt her stomach twist, because she knew exactly what was coming next. All eyes shifted back to Olivia. Her mouth went dry. Darius didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The calm in his tone was more powerful than any shouting could have been. He looked at her the way a teacher looks at a student who's just been caught cheating. "You had no problem embarrassing my family in front of everyone," he said, voice steady. "You should have no problem apologizing in front of everyone, too." Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Olivia felt the weight of 100 stares pressing down on her, pinning her in place. Her usual confidence, the authority she carried so easily, had shattered completely. She knew she couldn't ignore this. Not when the entire plane was waiting, not when the man she had humiliated was sitting there, staring at her unflinching. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She had always been in control, always had the power, always been the one who decided who belonged and who didn't. And now, she was the one on trial. Emma swallowed, shifting uncomfortably. This wasn't a normal situation. Passengers were supposed to trust flight attendants. They weren't supposed to turn on them. But how could they not? Everyone had seen what happened. And now Olivia was standing here, red-faced, being forced to reckon with the consequences in front of a full plane. Seconds stretched. Darius raised an eyebrow, waiting. Elena folded her arms. Tobias glanced between them, silent but watching, absorbing everything. Mia, too young to fully understand, clutched her stuffed toy tighter, sensing something important was happening. Passengers shifted in their seats, waiting for Olivia to speak. Even Robert Hayes had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. Everyone was listening. And Olivia had never felt smaller in her entire career. Her throat felt tight. She wanted to just walk away, to hide, but there was nowhere to go. This wasn't like before. She couldn't just dismiss this family. Not anymore. Because now, they held the power. She inhaled shakily, and then for the first time in her life, she had to apologize. Olivia's heart pounded as the silence stretched. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, suffocating in a way she had never experienced before. For years, she had been the one in control, the one enforcing the rules, the one deciding who was right and who was wrong. But now, she wasn't in control anymore. Darius Carter hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't threatened her. But his calm, unwavering demand had done something far worse. It had stripped her of her authority. The eyes of every single passenger were on her, waiting. Robert Hayes sat in his first-class seat, watching with the same quiet intensity. Emma Davis stood near the galley, gripping the edge of a tray, her knuckles white. Even Captain Holt, still in the cockpit, was likely listening through the intercom, waiting to see if she would take responsibility. And then there was the Carter family. Elena sat beside her children, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. But Olivia could see the way her fingers curled slightly into her lap, the way her jaw had set tight, as if she had been in this situation before. As if she was used to being treated this way, used to being dismissed, used to her family being looked at but never fought for. Tobias, only 10, watched her with something Olivia didn't like. Something that wasn't quite anger, but wasn't far from it either. A quiet, simmering disappointment. And Mia? She was too young to understand fully, but she could feel the tension, and she clutched her stuffed toy tighter, her wide eyes darting between her parents. They were waiting. She swallowed, feeling her pulse hammering in her throat. Her entire body was telling her to leave, to walk away, to pretend this wasn't happening. But she couldn't, not this time. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. I apologize for the inconvenience. Darius didn't react. Elena's lips twitched slightly, but it wasn't a smile. It was something sharper. Tobias just blinked. Mia tilted her head, sensing something wasn't right. Robert let out a quiet, unimpressed exhale. Passengers began murmuring again. "That's it," someone whispered. "She doesn't even sound sorry. She said inconvenience? That's not an apology." Olivia's stomach clenched. She felt the shift. This wasn't going to be enough. Darius leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "That's not an apology," she swallowed. You didn't just inconvenience us," Elena said, her voice quiet but firm, unshaken. "You humiliated us." Olivia's throat felt dry. "You assumed we didn't belong in those seats?" Darius continued. "You didn't check first. You didn't verify. You just decided. And you made us pack up our things and walk to the back of the plane in front of everyone." Passengers were listening closely now, shifting in their seats, watching Olivia's reaction. A few rows up, a woman in seat 14B, the one who had tweeted earlier, nodded slightly, her arms crossed. This wasn't just about one family anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been treated this way and never had someone speak up for them. And Olivia felt it. She inhaled sharply. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but what could she say? What defense could possibly erase the image of the Carters walking down the aisle? Shoulders stiff, heads held high, refusing to show how much it hurt. Nothing. There was nothing she could say. So she did the one thing she had never done before. She took a breath, a real deep breath, and she forced herself to look at them. I was wrong. The words tasted foreign in her mouth, like they didn't belong, but she knew deep down they were the only words that mattered. Darius didn't blink. Elena's posture didn't change, but Tobias tilted his head slightly, his grip on his seat loosening. Mia blinked, confused by the sudden shift. I was wrong, Olivia said again, her voice clearer this time. I judged before checking. I assumed things I shouldn't have, and I humiliated you in front of this entire plane. The murmurs stopped. The cabin was completely silent. Elena's eyes flickered slightly, but she still didn't let her guard down. And, Olivia exhaled slowly, and I am sorry. Darius finally leaned back in his seat, nodding slightly, not satisfied, but acknowledging. Emma, still standing near the galley, felt a lump form in her throat. She had worked under Olivia for years, had watched her control everything, dominate every situation, always hold the upper hand. And now, she had just watched her break down her own walls in front of an entire plane of people. For the first time, Olivia wasn't just enforcing a rule. She wasn't just following policy. She was owning up to what she had done. A moment passed, then another, and then quietly, Darius nodded once. Just once. Olivia exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She turned, quickly retreating toward the galley, feeling exposed, humiliated, but somehow relieved, because she knew. This moment, she would never forget it, and neither would anyone else on this plane. Olivia reached the galley and gripped the counter, her breathing uneven. Her hands trembled slightly and she clenched them into fists, forcing herself to regain control. She had never felt anything like that before. Never been made to face herself in such an unfiltered public way. The worst part? She knew she deserved it. For years, she had prided herself on being in charge, on maintaining order, on making quick decisions that no one questioned. She had always believed she was fair, professional, capable. But tonight she had seen herself through the eyes of an entire plane full of people, and she hadn't liked what she saw. She squeezed her eyes shut, inhaling deeply, but the quiet wasn't comforting. It only made the voices in her head louder. That's not an apology. You humiliated us. You assumed we didn't belong. Her own words echoed back at her, cruel and sharp. I don't know how you got these tickets, but these seats are for premium customers. A shiver ran down her spine. Had she really said that? Had she really stood in the middle of that cabin, looked a family in the eyes, and decided, without checking, that they weren't supposed to be there? Yes, she had, and that was the ugliest part of it all. The intercom buzzed. She jumped. Olivia, Captain Holt's voice came through, steady and unreadable. Please return to the cockpit. Her stomach tightened. She hesitated for just a second before pushing off the counter and straightening her uniform. As she walked down the aisle, she didn't look at the passengers. She couldn't. She had never felt more watched in her life. She reached the cockpit, stepping inside. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing her in with Captain Holt and First Officer Price. The captain didn't speak right away. He simply looked at her, not with anger, not with pity, just with quiet disappointment. That was somehow worse. Sit, he said. She obeyed. Holt sighed, rubbing a hand over his forehead. I've flown with you for years, Olivia. Never had a single issue. Never got a complaint. Always professional. Always in control. Her throat tightened. But tonight, he continued, I watched you let your own bias make a decision that should have never been made. Olivia swallowed, her nails digging into her palm. You've worked hard for this career, Holt said. You know how things work. You know how important customer service is. And yet tonight, you threw a family out of their seats without so much as verifying a single thing. Her stomach twisted. I don't know what was going through your head, Holt said, his voice calm but firm. And I don't care. Because the fact is, we all saw what happened. And do you know what I saw? She shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. What? Holt leaned forward slightly. I saw a woman who made a snap judgment based on nothing but assumption. The words stung. Holt's gaze didn't waver. And that judgment didn't just cost you a reprimand. It didn't just cost you the respect of the passengers. It cost you the trust of your crew. She flinched. She hadn't even thought about that. The younger flight attendants, Emma, James, Rachel, they had all seen it. They had all watched her make a mistake and refused to correct it until she was forced to. She had led them for years. Now, she had lost them. Holt exhaled. The airline has already decided. Her breath caught. He pulled out a small slip of paper, sliding it toward her. It was a printed email. She recognized the sender. Ethan Caldwell, Vice President of Operations. Her pulse pounded as she read. Effective immediately, Flight Attendant Olivia Blake is suspended pending further review of her conduct on Flight 476. Her vision blurred. Suspended. Not a warning. Not a simple disciplinary meeting. Suspended. Indefinitely. Holt watched her carefully. You will disembark first when we land. Security will escort you through the terminal. You are not to engage with passengers. Do you understand? Her mouth opened, then closed. There was no arguing, no justifying. She had done this to herself. A slow, painful realization crept over her. This wasn't just about one mistake. It was about who she had been. For years, she had operated under the belief that her judgment was enough, that she always knew best, that passengers who questioned her were just being difficult. But tonight had shattered that illusion. She had been wrong, and now she was paying the price. Olivia swallowed hard, forcing herself to nod. I understand. Holt nodded back, his expression unreadable. Good. He stood, reaching for the intercom again. Prepare for landing. As Olivia walked back through the cabin one last time, she knew this wasn't just a landing for the plane. This was the crash of everything she had built. The descent was smooth, but inside the cabin, the tension had never been heavier. Passengers fastened their seatbelts, shifting uncomfortably, their thoughts still lingering on what had just happened. But no one felt the weight of it more than Olivia Blake. She sat in the flight attendant's jump seat, staring blankly at the metal panel in front of her, her hands resting stiffly in her lap. Her breathing was steady, but her mind was in chaos, suspended. The word repeated over and over in her head, each time hitting harder. She had spent years climbing the ranks in this airline. She had been the senior flight attendant, the one who trained others, who set the example, who commanded respect, and in 7 minutes it had all come crashing down because of a single decision. A decision that had nothing to do with protocol, nothing to do with policy, a decision that had everything to do with her own bias. Her fingers curled into her uniform, pressing into the fabric. She had thought her apology might help, might soften the impact. But looking back, she knew it wasn't for the Carters. It was for herself. And that was why it hadn't been enough. A sharp ding from the intercom made her flinch. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Holt's voice echoed through the speakers. Steady, professional, but holding the weight of something unspoken. Welcome to our destination. The local time is 7:32 p.m. Please remain seated until we reach the gate, and thank you for flying with us. The landing gear touched the runway with a soft thud. The hum of the plane's descent vibrated through the floor beneath her feet, and Olivia realized this was the last time she would feel this, at least for a long time. Her career was in free fall. Her authority, gone. Her reputation, destroyed. The worst part, she wasn't sure she deserved to get it back. The plane slowed, taxiing toward the terminal. The airport lights outside blurred through the small round windows, casting flickering shadows across the cabin. Passengers fidgeted, stretching their legs, checking their phones, probably to see if the story had already started spreading. It had. She knew it had. Social media worked faster than any press release. By now there were tweets, posts, maybe even news reports forming around the incident. A small part of her, a desperate, lingering part, hoped that the airline would keep it quiet, that maybe this could just be an internal matter. But then she thought of Robert Hayes, and she knew this wasn't going away. The plane finally reached the gate. Another chime rang through the cabin. The final moment of normalcy. Then Captain Holt's voice came through the speaker again, softer this time. "Flight attendants, prepare for arrival." Her stomach twisted. This was it. She reached for the buckle of her harness, unfastening it with stiff fingers. The other attendants moved quickly, opening the overhead bins, preparing for the rush of passengers eager to leave. But Olivia? She wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Because the first person leaving this plane wouldn't be a passenger. It would be her. A figure appeared in the jet bridge just outside the open door, a uniformed security officer. Her breath hitched. They really called security. Passengers noticed immediately. Whispers spread through the rows like wildfire. "Wait, is that for her? Oh, wow, she's really in trouble. I told you the airline wasn't going to let this slide." The officer, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped inside and looked directly at her. His expression was unreadable, but there was no hesitation in his stance. "Ms. Blake," he said, his voice calm but firm, "you need to come with us." Her hands felt cold. She hesitated, just for a second. Then slowly, she stepped forward. For the first time in her career, she was the one being escorted off a plane. The cabin was silent. Not a single passenger spoke as she walked down the aisle, but she could feel them watching, the same way they had watched the Carters walk to the back of the plane. Some of them had looked away back then, avoided eye contact, pretended it wasn't happening. Not this time. Now, they stared. She could see it in their faces. The recognition, the shift. The understanding that this was more than just a single mistake. This was justice. She passed by row 14B, where the woman who had tweeted about the incident sat. The woman didn't say a word. She just looked at Olivia with something close to satisfaction. Further down, a man in row 22F raised an eyebrow. He had been one of the first to whisper about the injustice. Now, as he watched her leave, his phone was already in his hand. Olivia clenched her jaw, forcing herself to keep walking. She was almost there. And then, just as she reached the last few rows, she saw them, the Carters. Darius sat with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Elena met her gaze, tilting her head slightly, waiting to see if she would say something. Mia was dozing against her mother's side, oblivious to what was happening. And Tobias? Tobias looked right at her, not with satisfaction, not with smugness, just with understanding, and that made it worse. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. Because what was left to say? She had done what she had done, and now she was facing the same humiliation she had forced on them. Without a word, she turned away and stepped off the plane. The moment she passed the jet bridge doors, she heard the final announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to thank you for flying with us today. You may now deplane at your convenience." Behind her, the Carters rose from their seats. This time, they walked out of the plane on their own terms. And Olivia? She walked straight into the unknown. The moment Olivia stepped off the plane and into the jet bridge, the heavy whoosh of the cabin door closing behind her sent a chill down her spine. The hallway ahead was narrow, sterile, and felt like a tunnel leading to nowhere. The security officer walked beside her, silent but firm, his posture relaxed yet undeniably authoritative. He wasn't dragging her out in handcuffs, but he didn't need to. The simple fact that he was here at all, that was enough. She swallowed hard, her palms sweaty against the smooth fabric of her uniform. She had spent years walking off planes with her head held high, leading passengers through turbulence, making split-second decisions that earned her praise. She had walked through countless terminals with the quiet pride of a woman who belonged, who knew the rules, enforced them, owned them. But now she walked through this terminal like a disgraced employee being let out of a building after being fired. And in a way, that's exactly what she was. She felt the moment she entered the terminal, because all it took was one glance at the waiting area to know that the story had already spread. Dozens of passengers, those waiting for connecting flights, airport staff, and other travelers, stood near the gate, some talking, others on their phones. But a few had their cameras raised. They weren't just watching, they were recording. Her stomach twisted. She knew what this meant. Her name was about to be dragged across the internet. The video clips of her walking off this flight, escorted by security, would spread before she even reached baggage claim. It was already happening. In a far corner of the waiting area, a woman in her late 20s furiously typed on her phone, her brows furrowed in concentration. Olivia didn't even need to see the screen to know what was being posted. Flight attendant removed after racially profiling a black family. Whole plane saw it. Airline is handling it. Discrimination shook her justice. A man near the gate, sitting casually with a carry-on at his feet, tilted his phone just slightly as Olivia walked past. She knew the angle well. He wasn't texting, he was filming. Her jaw clenched. This was it. This was the moment where everything truly fell apart. She tried to keep her face blank, to not let them see the crumbling foundation beneath her. But it was impossible to ignore the way eyes followed her movements. And then, she saw them, the Carters. They had just stepped off the plane, walking at their own pace, as if they weren't in a rush to leave this moment behind. Darius led the way, his strides long, controlled, his face unreadable. But there was something in the way he carried himself that had shifted. He wasn't tense anymore. He wasn't holding back. He was done playing along. Elena walked beside him, one hand resting lightly on Tobias's shoulder, the other gripping Mia's small hand. The little girl blinked sleepily, rubbing her eyes, completely unaware of the storm that had raged around them. But Tobias? Tobias was watching everything, watching her. For a moment, Olivia felt something crack inside her. The way he looked at her wasn't filled with anger. It was filled with disappointment, like he had just learned something about the world he wasn't supposed to learn so soon. Like he had just realized that sometimes, even when you do everything right, people will still treat you like you don't belong. She wanted to look away. She wanted to walk faster, but she couldn't, because for the first time in her life, she had to stand in the mess she created. A voice cut through the tension. "Elena? Darius?" A man in an airline uniform approached quickly. Someone higher up, someone important. His badge read Marcus Bryant, Director of Passenger Relations. His expression was urgent, his concern real. "I'm so sorry for what happened," he said immediately, shaking Darius's hand. "We just got briefed on the situation, and let me assure you, we're taking this very seriously." Darius didn't smile. He didn't soften. "I hope so," he said simply. Elena gave a tight nod. "Because if you think an apology is enough, you'd be mistaken." Marcus hesitated, then nodded in agreement. "I understand completely. The airline will be reaching out privately, but in the meantime, we'd like to offer you all an upgraded stay at a 5-star hotel, complimentary flights in first class for your return," and Elena held up a hand, stopping him. "We didn't ask for that," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "We didn't ask for free things. We asked for basic respect." A few people in the crowd nodded. Marcus took a careful breath. "And you're absolutely right." He turned toward Olivia then. Her breath hitched. Because in that moment, she knew what was coming. The moment of finality. The moment where the story came full circle. He turned back to Darius, his tone even, measured. "She's no longer with this airline," he said. The words sliced through the air. Elena blinked. Darius didn't move. Passengers nearby gasped softly, murmuring among themselves. Robert Hayes, who had just stepped into the terminal, raised a brow but didn't look surprised. And Olivia, she felt the ground disappear beneath her. She had known a suspension was coming. She had known she might lose her job eventually. But hearing it out loud in front of everyone, her chest tightened. Her knees felt weak. She had spent years with this airline. She had spent years believing she was untouchable. And now, she was nothing. Marcus nodded once. "Security will escort her from the premises." Darius didn't celebrate. He didn't smirk. He didn't make a scene. He simply nodded once. "Good." And that was the worst part, because it wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been treated like they didn't belong. And now, justice had been served. The Carters turned and walked away, not with arrogance, not with triumph, but with the quiet dignity that Olivia had tried to strip from them. And as Olivia stood there, completely alone, she realized she would be remembered, but not for the reasons she had wanted. The airport buzzed with movement, but Olivia barely noticed. The sound of boarding announcements, the clatter of rolling suitcases, the distant hum of conversation, none of it registered. The only thing she could focus on was the security officer beside her and the reality that was sinking in with every step. She was fired, not suspended, not under review. Fired. It wasn't a possibility anymore. It wasn't something she could argue her way out of. It was done. Final. Public. And worst of all, it had happened in front of everyone. Passengers had recorded it. Travelers waiting at the gate had witnessed it. Airport employees had whispered about it. And now, as she was escorted past the terminal's main hall, she caught glimpses of screens, airport news feeds flickering with breaking headlines. Flight attendant removed mid-flight after incident with Black family. Airline apologizes after public outrage on Flight 476. Passenger justice. Family wrongly removed from seats. Flight attendant fired on the spot. Her breath hitched as she saw one of the broadcasts replaying footage from earlier. Someone had recorded it, the exact moment she had been asked to leave. She could see herself on the screen, walking stiffly, eyes forward, trying to maintain dignity. It hadn't worked. The camera had caught everything. Her tense jaw, her stiff posture, the way passengers had watched her with silent judgment. The angle shifted, showing Darius Carter's face as he had calmly told her to apologize. And then, her, stumbling over words. Fumbling for control she no longer had. She tore her gaze away from the screen, her stomach churning. This wasn't just an internal airline issue anymore. It was everywhere. By the time she reached the exit doors, stepping onto the pavement outside, she knew. Her career was over. Not just at this airline, everywhere. No airline in the country would hire her now. Not after this. Not after her name and face had been blasted across the internet as an example of everything wrong with the industry. The security officer stopped a few feet away from the curb. "This is as far as I take you," he said, his tone neutral, detached. "You're free to go." She nodded stiffly. But where? Her car was in the employee lot, far from here. And calling a rideshare? She could already imagine the awkwardness of sitting in a stranger's car while notifications popped up on their phone about her. Her mind raced. Then, just as she was about to take a step forward, she saw them. The Carters, standing near the taxi line, waiting for a ride. Olivia froze. Elena was adjusting Mia's coat, gently fixing the hood over the little girl's curly hair. Darius stood beside her, speaking quietly to Tobias, who was nodding along, though his eyes still flickered around the airport, taking in everything. They looked like a family just trying to move on. But Olivia, she wasn't sure she could, because for the first time, she saw them differently. Not as passengers, not as a problem to be handled, not as a situation to control, as people. People she had humiliated, people she had wronged, people who, despite everything, weren't standing there celebrating her downfall. They weren't gloating, they weren't recording, they weren't laughing at her the way she had once looked down on them. They were just going home, and that's when it hit her. She had stolen something from them, something she could never give back. Because even though they had won, even though the world had sided with them, the damage had been done. For the rest of their lives, no matter how many flights they took, no matter how much money they spent, no matter how much respect they earned, they would always remember this. The way they had been told to move, the way no one had stood up for them, the way their children had learned a lesson far too soon. Tobias would grow up knowing what it felt like to be treated as less than. Mia, too young to fully understand now, would one day hear the story and feel the sting of it. And Olivia, she had played a role in that. Her chest felt tight. She had ruined herself trying to maintain power she never actually had. And yet the worst part, the thing that twisted in her gut more than anything else, the Carters would be fine. They would move forward. They had each other. They had the truth on their side. But Olivia, she had nothing. No job, no career, no respect. Just a name that people would remember for all the wrong reasons. Her eyes met Darius's for a fraction of a second, and she knew this would be the last time their paths ever crossed. Then just like that, the taxi pulled up. Darius placed a hand on Tobias's shoulder, guiding him toward the back seat. Elena lifted Mia inside, securing her safely, before sliding in herself. The doors closed. The driver pulled away. And just like that, they were gone. Olivia watched until the car disappeared into the flow of traffic. Then she turned, stepping onto the sidewalk, feeling the coldest kind of emptiness settle into her bones. For the first time in her life, she truly understood what it meant to be left behind. The night air was crisp, biting against Olivia's skin as she stood on the sidewalk outside the airport. The Carters were gone. The cameras had stopped recording. The security officer had left. And now, she was alone. The reality of what had just happened settled over her like a suffocating weight. She had spent her entire career enforcing rules, making sure people respected airline policies, believing she was the one in control. But here she was, a woman without a job, without authority, without even a plan. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out with stiff fingers, already dreading what she'd see. The notifications were relentless. Hundreds of them. News outlets were already running the story. Social media was exploding with reactions. Her name was trending, and not in the way she had ever wanted. She hesitated before clicking on one of the posts. It was a video, a passenger's recording of her walking off the plane with security at her side. The caption read, "Flight attendant gets exactly what she deserves after kicking a black family off a flight for no reason. Chocker's accountability, chantage or do better." The comments were worse. "This is why we record everything now. If no one had filmed this, nothing would have happened." She looked so smug when she made the move. Funny how she wasn't so smug when security showed up. Fired? Good. She shouldn't be allowed to work in customer service ever again. This happens all the time. The only difference is that, this time, someone in first class had power. Imagine how many times it happens when no one important is watching. I hope she sees this and learns something. But people like her never do. Olivia's stomach churned. She clicked onto another article. Flight attendant fired mid-flight after passenger calls out racial discrimination. A lump formed in her throat as she scrolled. It wasn't just tweets. It wasn't just one video. It was everywhere, multiple angles, multiple posts, multiple people calling her out. She had thought that losing her job was the worst thing that could happen. But this was something else. This was permanent. Her career, over. Her reputation, destroyed. Her name, it would always be attached to this moment, a moment she couldn't take back. Her grip tightened on her phone as the weight of it all crushed her. She could try to fight it. She could try to explain herself. She could tell people that she hadn't meant for things to go the way they had, that she wasn't really a bad person, that it had been a mistake. But the truth was, she had meant it in the moment. She had assumed the Carters didn't belong in premium economy. She had believed she was making the right call. She had let her bias dictate her actions. And the worst part, she hadn't even questioned herself. Not until she had been forced to. A shaky breath escaped her lips. She had spent years thinking she was better than the passengers she controlled. Now she was nothing to them. They would forget about her in a week. Her name would fade from trending topics. Another scandal would take over the news cycle. But the Carters? They wouldn't forget. Tobias would remember what it felt like to be told his family didn't belong somewhere they had rightfully paid to be. Mia, when she got older, would hear the story and wonder why no one had stood up for her family sooner. Darius and Elena, they would always carry this moment as a reminder that respect wasn't guaranteed. And Olivia? She would carry it too, because there was no coming back from this. She looked up, scanning the terminal for somewhere to go. But where do you go when your entire life has collapsed in a matter of hours? Her feet felt heavy as she forced herself to move. One step, then another, and for the first time in her life, she had nowhere to be, no uniform to wear, no authority to cling to. Just the weight of her own actions, dragging behind her, impossible to leave behind. And that was a sentence all on its own. It had been 4 weeks since Flight 476. The world had moved on. News cycles had shifted. Social media had found new outrage, new scandals, new distractions. But Olivia's life, it was unchanged. She had applied for jobs everywhere. Airlines, hotels, corporate offices, customer service positions. Nothing. Every interview ended the same. We're going in a different direction, or worse. We've reviewed your history, and we don't believe you'd be a good fit for our team. They didn't have to say it. She knew why. Her name was still out there. Her face was still attached to the incident. No company wanted the baggage she brought with her. She had tried to fight it, tried to tell herself that it wasn't fair, that she had been punished enough. But every night when she lay awake in her tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling, she knew the truth. She hadn't just lost her job that day. She had lost who she thought she was. She had spent years believing she was right, believing that passengers like the Carters were the ones who caused problems. But now she knew. She had been the problem all along, and nothing. No apology, no regret, no second chances could ever erase what she had done. Some mistakes could be forgiven. Some mistakes could be fixed. But this was one she would carry forever, and no flight in the world could take her far enough to escape it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new one.